Well, good morning, everybody, and hope you all had a good weekend this past weekend. I know some folks across the country saw some very beneficial rains. I'm going to point those out by looking here at some satellite data as the sun was rising this morning. I'm talking about regions over here in Virginia, North Carolina that saw some storms. We're talking about the storms that came through parts of Nebraska here, delivering rains that were much needed, especially parts of this section of Nebraska. Some places there hadn't seen rain in over a month. And then this feature right in through here, this was actually a very weak tropical system that developed this past weekend that's now moved this morning over the Rio Grande and is moving its way eventually to get kind of pulled into the southwestern monsoon. If I just take you back to yesterday, we can see where that, where that system was just as it came on shore, and it delivered a lot of very heavy rainfall. But what we're going to spend a lot of time probably focusing on this week is what's going to be happening in the west as a large ridge opens, really delivering a lot of heat, a lot of 100 to 110 degree days coming up here through parts of California's Central Valley into the Pacific Northwest. But before we dig into that, let's just take a look at the last 72 hours worth of total accumulated precipitation. We can see down here the very heavy rainfall starting to just work its way and eat away at the drought that's in Texas down here. We're going to see better rains coming to parts of Texas, Central Texas, Oklahoma. That's all coming very soon. But we have to see the pattern fully evolve before we get there. Now, just something else to make a point of, we saw some flooding down here right along the Mexico-Arizona border over the weekend from our still quite impressive southwest monsoonal flow. Believe it or not, it's that flow that's kind of curling around here into parts of Nebraska that's going to be spreading its rains right in through here over the next 24 to 36 hours. I want to make one last point here. I put this in the report. Some of the storms that came through on Friday into parts of eastern Washington, Idaho, Montana, and this part of Oregon did produce some large hail, and there's a lot of damage to the crops in that area. But the overall flow pattern, as you can see, is still doing something like this. We need to see where this ridge that it's all going around is going to head. And before I leave this image, one last thing to point out. Very beneficial rains coming through Indiana, parts of Michigan, and into this section of the Corn Belt here in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota as well. Just wanted to point that out. If we just look at the bigger picture here, you can still see the areas that are desperate for rainfall. We have some very good news for some of these places. But again, this large section of the western Corn Belt here from Nebraska and South Dakota back into Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, we're going to see better rains down into Texas, Oklahoma, and even some better precipitation and some cooler weather in the near term coming into New England, which is going to continue their kind of cool weather stretch they've had over the last several days. So let's take a look at the high-res forecast. This is the accumulation of precipitation through midday Wednesday. So now we can see through Tuesday, getting out here into Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, where we're expecting the heaviest rains. So we got the tropical system going through here. We have the storms running over the larger ridge that's sitting in Texas like this. It's actually getting pulled into a weaker frontal boundary that's wrapped up into a low over the Carolinas. And that low in the Carolinas today could produce severe storm risk in this area, strong to severe storms and locally some heavy rainfall. But given the drought that had developed here along the coast, this is going to be a welcomed event here. But the bigger picture is right here. Watch the ridge develop in the western United States as we pull through Wednesday into Thursday and Friday. This is going to be the setup, this highly amplified pattern featuring a cutoff low that's going to eventually form over the Great Lakes and Eastern Corn Belt while the heat really pours in under this ridge. And the models want to keep some sense of that flow all the way through almost the end of August. So you notice here I'm all the way out to the 27th just looking at the model runs. We just continue to see something setting up like this. So in our next week, I pulled this right out of the report. We're going to see the temperatures really crank in the west while we're going to watch this high pressure system right here just slowly diminish over the next 3 days. Isolated storms running through this part of the Canadian prairie into the northern plains and upper Midwest, and that heavy rainfall we're expecting here just in the next 2 days. Okay, from there, this is where I expect the pattern to be by midweek toward the end of the week. There's that highly amplified jet stream pattern, and we're going to watch a cutoff low develop in this area. So a lot of scattered storms in and around the Great Lakes states, Midwest, Corn Belt area, while the front slowly sags farther and farther toward the south. So some very heavy rains are expected here from coastal Carolinas. This is later this week too, down into parts of the lower Mississippi River Valley. And it's going to set up in this area all the way into week 2 as well. So we can kind of put those two maps together. We've got the week 1 precipitation anomalies, which is what you see over here on the left, and then the week 2. over here on the right. And that's where that pattern really stalls out and possibly delivers the best chance at rainfall. Now, in terms of what's going on in the tropics, we've got one little weak disturbance that's given a 0% chance of developing in the middle of the Atlantic and not a whole lot following that. But we have to keep a very close eye on what's coming off of Africa right now, as I think as we move our way toward the end of this month, we're going to see better chances of seeing that precip. From here, let's just stitch it all together and give you one last map on precipitation. This one looks at the next 15 days in terms of precipitation anomalies. And it kind of allows us to hone in on those areas that are really going to be picking up some drought-busting rains here in the next 15 days. Speaking of drought busting, I just want to show you, since the beginning of this year, note how dry Texas, the plains, getting into the western Corn Belt has been. For example, this pocket right here in Nebraska is having its fourth driest start to any year on record. And down into Texas, we have a top 3, top 4 event. And just to make a point here, as the heat really pours into California this week, we're just continuing what is the driest year on record in California. Our all hazards weather map points toward those regions in the west where we've already got excessive heat watches out, but there's flood watches still in place here in parts of the Four Corner states, while heat is still going to be in place for another 36 to 48 hours in parts of the southern plains getting over into the lower Mississippi River Valley. But let's finish this up with some discussion on temperatures. Ready? Here's Monday's highs. We're getting into Tuesday. Watch the front continue to sag farther south on Tuesday into Wednesday. So that's when we finally start to replace the hundreds that we're going to be seeing here Monday, Tuesday with much cooler weather. Where the ridge amplifies, you can now see those temperatures kind of stringing up through the Central Valley into the Pacific Northwest. And so go from Wednesday into Thursday and Friday. It won't be until we get toward the weekend that we really see above average temperatures returning to New England. But meanwhile, much of the middle part of the country here getting a break from the excessive heat, especially in parts of the plains that has been endured for quite some time here. So this is a welcome change, and we just play this on out to Sunday. You can see kind of the end of it there. What are we watching in terms of the longer range temperature pattern? Well, as you saw earlier, the models want to keep that ridge over the west. So as I take this all the way out there, day 5 through 10, this would be the 20th through the 25th. We still see much of the same in terms of the temperature pattern. And then as we walk this on out to the end of the month, there we go. That would be all the way out there to the 30th, so the 25th through the 30th. Excessive heat seems to stick around in the west, while we see the risk of flash drought happening for parts of the Pacific Northwest, and also some sustained heat coming through the Canadian Prairie that we need to keep an eye on. But this whole pattern brings relief to the south, which has been probably the hottest area in the country compared to normal. I'm talking here specifically about Texas. So we'll just keep an eye on these moving pieces throughout the week, and I look forward to giving you a more in-depth report tomorrow. We're going to focus a bit more on the western United States in tomorrow's report, and we'll watch for the new long-range data to be coming out too. So I appreciate your attention, and we'll talk to you then. Thanks.